The night pressed down on the city like a heavy secret. Rain streaked across the tall courthouse windows, turning reflections of neon lights into jagged scars. In a quiet office on the top floor, Judge Alexander Grant worked late, his eyes sharp as blades as he scanned through case files. He was known as the ruthless judge, a man who feared no enemy and forgave no crime. Power was his shield, authority his throne. But tonight, destiny was about to strike where he least expected. Far away in the hushed corridors of St. Mary's Hospital, a newborn's cry pierced the silence. Nurses rushed back and forth, but the sound lingered, raw, desperate, unsettling. That cry would ripple across the city, reaching a man who had never imagined himself near a cradle, much less being called a father. At precisely 11:47 p.m., Alexander's phone lit up. He frowned, annoyed at the late disturbance, but answered. The line crackled, then a woman's urgent voice spoke. "Judge Grant, this is St. Mary's Hospital. We need you here immediately. The child, the baby has been registered under your name." Alexander's grip on the phone tightened. "My name? That's impossible. There must be some mistake." But the voice remained steady. "No, sir. The records are clear. The baby is yours." The words struck like thunder, leaving him frozen. Baby? He had no children. He had no family. His world was order, rules, and judgment. And yet, someone out there was calling him father. If you believe that fate can twist lives with a single mistake, stay with me. Subscribe now, because here you'll find stories where power, pride, and love collide, and nothing is ever the same again. Hours earlier, on the other side of town, Emma Hayes staggered out of a crowded elevator, exhaustion etched into her pale face. Her scrubs clung to her skin after a 14-hour shift. She was young, but the lines under her eyes revealed a life heavier than her age should allow. Emma worked tirelessly as a trainee nurse, juggling bills, a sick mother at home, and the crushing weight of dreams that always seemed just out of reach. Her phone buzzed in her trembling hands as she typed a desperate message to a colleague, pleading for help to cover another shift, begging for a ride, something, anything. Her eyes blurred with fatigue and her thumbs slipped. She hit send. The message flew not to her friend, but to an unintended recipient, Alexander Grant. At that moment, Emma didn't know her mistake. She didn't know that the text, simple and desperate, had landed in the inbox of the city's most feared man. She only knew she had to return to the nursery ward, where an abandoned infant lay, wrapped in thin blankets, fighting for warmth. Back in his office, Alexander glanced at his buzzing phone. An unfamiliar number. He almost deleted it, but curiosity flickered. He read the words Emma had written, raw, urgent, painfully human. For a man who lived behind walls of iron, the message felt strangely personal. He frowned, tossed the phone aside, and convinced himself it was nothing. But fate had already cast its net. Because within hours, as the rain drummed harder against the glass, that same man would be called to the hospital. Not as a judge, not as a figure of power, but as something he never believed he could be. A father. The newborn's cry echoed in Emma Hayes' ears long after she stepped out of the nursery. She leaned against the cold wall of the corridor, pressing her phone to her chest as though it could steady the weight in her heart. The baby had been left behind, no parents waiting, no family listed. Just a fragile life clinging to existence. Emma knew that feeling all too well, being unwanted, fighting alone. Her break was short. A voice from the nurse's station called her name, and she pushed herself upright, forcing a smile that never reached her tired eyes. For everyone else, she was the bright trainee nurse, always willing to help. But behind that mask was a girl carrying the world on her back. At 24, Emma's life was already a battlefield. Her father had abandoned the family years ago, leaving her mother bedridden with an illness that drained both her body and their savings. Emma's paycheck barely covered rent, medication, and groceries. She lived in a tiny apartment where the sound of her mother's coughs filled the nights. That evening, after tending to the infant again, she slipped into the staff lounge and pulled out her phone. Bills stacked in her inbox like daggers pointed at her chest. Her thumb hovered, then she typed a message to her colleague, pleading. "Please, can you cover tomorrow? I can't keep this up. My mom is worse and I can't lose this job. Please." Her hands shook. Her exhaustion blurred the letters. She hit send without double-checking. The message vanished into the digital void, straight into the phone of Judge Alexander Grant. Emma never noticed. She shoved the phone back into her pocket and returned to her duties, unaware that her plea had reached the one man in the city least likely to understand mercy. Hours dragged on. The night grew heavier. Every time Emma passed the nursery, her gaze lingered on the baby's crib. She whispered promises to the child as though the infant could hear, "You're not alone. Not while I'm here." She knew she shouldn't get attached. Nurses were trained to keep distance, to stay professional. But how could she? The tiny fists, the fragile breath, the way the baby reached out into the void, it broke something open inside her. When her shift finally ended, she pulled her coat tight against the rain outside and hurried to the bus stop. Water seeped into her shoes, cold and unforgiving, but her thoughts burned hotter than ever. How long could she keep this up? How many more double shifts before her body gave out? Her phone buzzed again, but she ignored it, thinking it was just another overdue reminder. Somewhere across the city, however, Alexander Grant sat in his office, staring at her accidental message. The raw desperation in those words clung to him, unsettled him in ways he couldn't admit. For Emma, the night was just another battle. For Alexander, it was the beginning of a storm. And neither of them knew that the baby, the very one whose cries haunted the hospital halls, would soon bind their lives together in ways neither power nor poverty could undo. Morning light cut through the rain, spilling across the marble floors of Alexander Grant's penthouse. The view stretched over the city like a kingdom under his command. From this height, the chaos below looked small, insignificant, just the way he liked it. Alexander lived a life built on iron discipline. Every hour of his day was accounted for. Early workouts, court preparations, hearings, private meetings with officials and tycoons. Nothing slipped past his control. That was why they called him the ruthless judge. He ruled his courtroom like a battlefield, delivering verdicts that shattered corrupt empires and buried careers. To the public, he was a symbol of justice. To those who crossed him, he was a nightmare. Yet, behind the polished suits and the razor-sharp stare, there was silence. His penthouse was vast but empty, a gallery of fine art and luxury untouched by warmth. He had no wife, no children, no one waiting for him at night. Power had filled the void where love should have been, and he had convinced himself that was enough. Until last night. He couldn't shake the phone call. The hospital's voice still echoed, "The baby has been registered under your name." Impossible. He had no children. He trusted no one enough to share that part of himself. And yet, the system was flawless. Records didn't lie. Someone was playing a game, and Alexander hated games he didn't control. He poured himself black coffee and scrolled through his phone. That was when his eyes caught on the accidental message from Emma. Simple, desperate, human. A nurse begging for help with her sick mother. Words that didn't belong in his world of contracts and verdicts. He read them again. Something about that message gnawed at him. He almost convinced himself it was a scam, yet the tone, the mistakes, the rawness, no con artist would write like that. He pushed the thought away. He had a reputation to protect, enemies circling, and a case that could topple one of the city's wealthiest dynasties. But the idea of a baby tied to his name threatened to rip through all of it. By midday, his driver pulled up in front of the courthouse. Cameras flashed as he stepped out, reporters shouting questions about his latest ruling. He ignored them as always, his face a mask of indifference. Yet inside, his chest carried a weight he didn't want to name. During the hearing, Alexander's voice was as sharp as ever, cutting through lies and defenses. But even as he delivered his judgment, his mind flickered back to the hospital, to the call he couldn't ignore, to the baby. When court adjourned, his assistant approached with files, but he waved her off. He already knew what he had to do. He had to see for himself. That night, as the rain began again, Alexander's car turned not toward his penthouse but toward St. Mary's Hospital. His jaw was set, his mind prepared for battle. He would uncover the truth, tear apart whoever dared use his name, and silence the storm before it grew. What he didn't expect was that waiting inside those walls was not just the truth, but the woman whose text had already reached him, Emma Hayes. And when their eyes met for the first time, the battle lines of fate were drawn. The automatic doors of St. Mary's slid open with a hiss, letting in a gust of rain-soaked air as Alexander Grant strode into the lobby. His presence carried the same authority as his courtroom. Sharp suit, polished shoes, eyes like cold steel. Nurses at the front desk stiffened, whispers running like sparks down the corridor. He didn't wait for greetings or pleasantries. "Where's the administrator?" His voice cut through the room, low but commanding. Moments later, the head nurse led him down sterile hallways. The closer they drew to the nursery, the sharper his jaw clenched. Every step echoed with indignation. How dare someone use my name? How dare they think they could trap me like this? They stopped at the glass window of the infant ward. Dozens of tiny cribs lined the room, but one in particular had a red tag clipped to the side. The name written in neat black letters, Alexander Grant. His pulse spiked. Inside, the baby wailed, small fists punching the air as though fighting the injustice of life itself. For a man who had sentenced criminals, dismantled fortunes, and crushed political careers, Alexander felt an emotion he couldn't name, something raw, unsettling. "Who signed these records?" he demanded. The head nurse hesitated, glancing at a clipboard. The forms were processed during the night shift. A young nurse was on duty. Emma Hayes. The name clicked instantly in his mind. Emma. The message. Without waiting, he pushed past the nurse and strode toward the break room. He found her there, still in scrubs, hair tied back, exhaustion etched into every movement. She looked up as the door opened, and her tired eyes met his furious ones. "You," he said, voice like thunder. Emma blinked, startled. "Me?" He held up the clipboard. "Don't play innocent. My name is on a birth record. You were on duty. Explain this nonsense, now." Her mouth parted in shock. "What? No, that's impossible. I never." "Don't lie to me." He stepped closer, his presence overwhelming. "Do you know who I am?" "I know exactly who you are," she shot back, trembling but unflinching. "The judge who terrifies everyone in this city. But I don't know what you're talking about. I would never write your name on a child's record." Her defiance surprised him. Most people crumbled under his stare. She didn't. "Then how do you explain this?" he pressed. Emma's gaze darted toward the nursery window. The baby's cries filtered through the glass, piercing the air between them. She swallowed hard. "All I know is that child was abandoned. I've been caring for him since last night. I don't know who wrote your name down. But it wasn't me." Silence stretched. For a moment, all that existed was the sound of the baby's sobs. Emma turned back to him, her voice steadier now. "Judge Grant, whatever you think of me, whatever you think of this situation, look at him." Her eyes glistened as she pointed toward the infant. "Doesn't matter who you are. That baby needs someone." The words cut through his armor like a blade. He wanted to argue, to dismiss her, but his gaze betrayed him. Through the glass, the infant's cries softened as though sensing the storm outside. Alexander straightened, forcing his voice back to steel. "This isn't over. I'll find out who's behind this." He turned to leave, but as he did, his eyes flicked once more toward Emma, her weary figure standing guard over a child that wasn't hers. He hated the thought that, for the first time in years, someone had spoken to him not with fear, but with truth. The next morning, Alexander returned to St. Mary's, convinced he would end this farce quickly. His lawyers had been up all night combing through paperwork, demanding answers, but the hospital records were airtight. The infant's file listed him as the father. No signatures traced, no loopholes uncovered. Someone had gone to extraordinary lengths to trap him in this mess. And so he came back, not as a father, not as a man, but as a hunter looking for the truth. Emma was already on shift. When she saw him stride through the corridor again, her stomach knotted. She had hoped the storm was over. But the storm had just begun. "You again," Alexander said flatly, his eyes scanning the ward before landing on her. She crossed her arms, trying to shield herself from his piercing gaze. "This is a hospital, not a courtroom. People come back." His lips twitched, almost into a smile, but it vanished. "Don't test me. Whoever is behind this used my name. Until I have answers, I'll be here." And he was. Throughout the day, Alexander remained like a shadow in the hospital halls. He stood by administrators' desks, questioned staff, and loomed near the nursery as though sheer presence could bend reality to his will. And every time Emma turned a corner, she found him there, sharp and unyielding. It should have been unbearable. Yet the strangest thing happened. The baby, tiny, fragile, abandoned, stirred whenever Alexander was near. His cries softened when the judge's figure appeared by the crib, as though instinct recognized something Emma could not explain. The first time it happened, Emma noticed. She frowned, rocking the infant gently. "That's strange. He's been restless all morning." Alexander glanced down, his features unreadable. Coincidence. But when it happened again, when the baby reached out, little fists stretching toward him, Emma caught his eye. "Doesn't look like coincidence to me." For a moment, silence held them. The baby cooed softly, and something in Alexander's hard expression flickered. So quick Emma almost missed it. Later, as Emma carried charts to the nurse's station, she found Alexander waiting for her. "Tell me about the child," he demanded. Her shoulders stiffened. "What? Planning to add this to your investigation?" "Planning to understand what's happening," he corrected, his tone clipped but not cruel. Emma hesitated, then sighed. He was left here last night. No parents, no identification. Just nothing. He's healthy, but he has no one. No one, Alexander repeated, almost to himself. Emma studied him for a long moment. The man who terrified lawyers, who ruled courtrooms like a king, standing here, silent, staring at a child who had no one. She saw something unguarded in his eyes, something he would never admit. She lowered her voice. I don't know why your name is on those records, Judge Grant. But maybe this isn't just about a mistake. Maybe it's about what you're going to do now. He looked at her sharply. And what exactly do you expect me to do? Cradle him? Sing lullabies? Her lips curved, not into a smile but something softer, sadder. No, but maybe stop thinking like a judge for once, and start thinking like a man. The words lingered in the sterile air long after she walked away. For the rest of the day, Alexander stayed near the ward. He told himself it was to guard his reputation, to catch whoever had framed him. But when the baby's small hand curled around his finger through the crib bars, Alexander realized something he didn't want to admit. This bond, this tiny, fragile bond, wasn't something he had chosen. It was something that had chosen him. By the end of the week, St. Mary's was buzzing with whispers. Nurses leaned close at the stations. Doctors exchanged wary glances in the halls. Everyone had heard the story, the ruthless judge, linked to a baby. Some believed it. Others laughed it off as gossip. But Emma felt the weight of every glance, every hushed conversation that stopped the moment she walked into the room. Careful around her, one nurse muttered when she passed. She's probably trying to trap him. Emma's chest tightened, her steps faltering. She wanted to defend herself, but what could she say? The truth sounded absurd, that she had no idea how Alexander's name ended up on the baby's file. That her only mistake was sending a text to the wrong number. Meanwhile, Alexander's presence at the hospital only fueled the rumors. He interrogated staff, demanded documents, and placed calls to his private investigators between visits to the ward. For a man obsessed with control, the lack of answers was infuriating. Whoever forged this record knew exactly what they were doing, he told his lawyer over the phone. They didn't just want chaos, they wanted me implicated. But there was something he didn't admit, even to himself. Every time he left the hospital, his mind lingered on the baby's cry. And on Emma's eyes, tired, defiant, unafraid. Late one evening, Alexander stood at the glass window, watching Emma rock the infant. The room was quiet, save for the soft hum of machines. Emma's voice drifted through the glass, low and soothing, words meant only for the child. You don't know it, little one, she whispered, but you're stronger than anyone here gives you credit for. Alexander couldn't look away. The image unsettled him more than any conspiracy ever had. That night, his investigator finally returned with news. A falsified digital trail led back to a name Alexander recognized all too well. An old adversary from court, a man who had lost everything after one of Alexander's rulings. The revelation lit a fire in his chest. Someone was trying to destroy him, not with evidence, but with scandal. Still, one question burned. Why involve Emma? Why was her name floating through rumors alongside his? The answer came faster than he expected. 2 journalists ambushed him outside the hospital the next morning, cameras flashing. Judge Grant, is it true you fathered a child with a young nurse? Is Emma Hayes the mother? Alexander froze, rage simmering beneath his composed exterior. Before he could answer, Emma stepped outside carrying supplies. The cameras pivoted instantly. Miss Hayes, over here. Are you the baby's mother? Are you in a relationship with Judge Grant? Emma's face drained of color. She shook her head, stumbling back. No, that's not. But the damage was done. The headlines would write themselves. Alexander pushed forward, shielding her with his frame, glaring at the reporters until they scattered. The moment they were gone, he turned to Emma. You see what happens when you get pulled into my world? His voice was sharp, but his eyes carried something else, something closer to warning than anger. Emma's throat tightened. I never asked for this. His jaw clenched. Neither did I. They stood in silence, both caught in a storm neither had chosen. For the first time, Alexander saw the fear behind Emma's defiance. And Emma saw the man behind the judge's mask, cornered, furious, and maybe just as lost as she was. But neither realized how close they were to breaking. Because rumors were only the beginning. The real fall was still to come. The hospital cafeteria was unusually crowded that afternoon. Nurses gathered in small groups, doctors shuffled through trays, and administrators spoke in hushed tones. But every pair of eyes shifted when Alexander Grant walked in, his presence slicing the air like a blade. Emma froze mid-step, clutching a folder of charts. She had tried all morning to avoid him after the reporter's ambush, but fate wasn't granting her mercy. Alexander's eyes found her instantly. Sharp, relentless, burning with something she couldn't name. He crossed the room in long strides, and before she could slip away, his voice thundered loud enough for every ear to hear. "You." The room fell silent. Emma's pulse raced. "Judge Grant, please?" "Enough." He held up the folder she had given the administrator the night before. "Do you enjoy this? Do you enjoy dragging my name through the mud?" Gasps rippled across the cafeteria. Emma's face flushed hot. "What are you talking about? I haven't." "Don't lie to me." His words cracked like a gavel. "First, my name ends up on a birth record. Then your message appears on my phone. Now reporters swarm the hospital shouting your name alongside mine. Do you think I'm blind? Do you think I don't see what this is?" Emma's throat closed. She looked around, the stares, the whispers, the judgment hanging heavy in the air. "You think I planned this?" Her voice trembled, but she stood tall. "That I want this kind of attention? I've spent every night caring for that child while you've done nothing but demand answers and bark accusations." Her words struck, but Alexander's pride burned hotter than reason. He leaned closer, his voice a hiss meant for her but heard by all. "If this is some scheme to trap me, you'll regret it." The silence that followed was unbearable. Emma's chest rose and fell with shallow breaths. Around them, colleagues who once respected her now looked at her with suspicion, even pity. Her eyes glistened, but she refused to cry. Not here, not in front of him. She lifted her chin, whispering just loud enough, "You may be a judge, but you don't know justice." And then she turned, walking out of the cafeteria as every gaze followed her. Alexander stood frozen, the echo of her words gnawing at him. But instead of softening, he hardened. He told himself he was protecting his reputation, his name. Yet something inside him twisted, unsettled, even as he convinced himself she was the enemy. Hours later, fate delivered another blow. The baby, fragile, abandoned, innocent, fell sick. His tiny chest struggled for breath, monitors beeping erratically. Doctors rushed into the nursery, nurses scrambling with oxygen masks. And through the chaos, Emma was there, holding the infant's hand, whispering soft words no one else could hear. Alexander arrived moments later, alarmed by the commotion. He stopped short at the window, his chest tightening at the sight of Emma. Her face pale, her voice steady, her tears falling freely as she fought for the child's life. For the first time, he didn't see her as a threat, a problem, or a pawn in some scheme. He saw her as she truly was, a woman who cared when no one else did. And it struck him like a hammer to the chest. He had humiliated the only person who refused to give up. The hospital's pediatric ward was dim, machines humming like restless hearts in the night. The infant lay in an incubator, tiny chest rising and falling under the mask of oxygen. Nurses moved swiftly, doctors murmured updates, but for Emma, the world had narrowed to the fragile hand she held through the plastic barrier. Her whisper was steady, though her tears betrayed her. "Hold on, little one. Please, hold on." From the hallway, Alexander watched, his throat tight. He had faced killers, corrupt officials, empires of crime, yet nothing unsettled him like this. The sight of Emma, shoulders trembling but unwavering in her care, struck him harder than any courtroom ambush. And he remembered his own words, his accusation, his cruelty. "If this is some scheme to trap me, you'll regret it." The shame burned. Hours later, after the baby stabilized, Alexander retreated to his car, slamming the door shut. His phone buzzed, his investigator again. "Judge Grant," the voice on the other end said, "we've traced the registration. It wasn't a clerical error. It was sabotage." Alexander's knuckles whitened around the phone. "Explain." "A former defendant, Marcus Hale, lost his company after your ruling last year. He bribed a clerk inside the hospital to alter the files. The baby was abandoned, yes, but Hale made sure your name appeared as the father. It's meant to ruin you, sir, to drag you through scandal." The pieces clicked like iron shackles. The false record, the media frenzy, the whispers around Emma, and she had been caught in the crossfire. Alexander ended the call, but the guilt didn't end with it. He leaned back, eyes closed, memories of Emma's humiliation replaying like a verdict he couldn't overturn. He had thrown her to the wolves when she was just as much a victim as he was. The next day he found her in the break room. She was folding hospital blankets, her movements mechanical, her eyes hollow from lack of sleep. When she saw him, her jaw tightened. "Come to accuse me again?" she asked, voice sharp but weary. Alexander paused. For once, his authority faltered. No. I came to tell you, you were right. Emma froze, the blanket slipping from her hands. What? It wasn't you. Someone forged the records. A man seeking revenge against me. You were never part of it. Her eyes narrowed. And how long did it take you to figure that out? Before or after you destroyed what little reputation I had left in this hospital? He winced. The truth stung sharper than any gavel. I was wrong. I let my pride blind me. She shook her head, tears welling despite her defiance. You don't get it. You humiliated me in front of everyone. You turned me into a suspect when all I did was care for that baby. You may be free of guilt now, but I'm the one still paying for it. Her words cut deeper than any enemy ever had. Alexander had spent his life dismantling lies, exposing corruption, wielding power like a sword. But standing here in front of Emma Hayes, he realized power meant nothing if it destroyed the innocent. For the first time in years, Judge Alexander Grant felt powerless. And he knew redemption wouldn't come from the courtroom. It would have to come from her. 4 days, Alexander returned to St. Mary's without explanation. He told his assistant it was unfinished business, but deep down he knew the truth. Something inside him had shifted. He was no longer there only to defend his name. He was there because of the baby, and because of her. Emma avoided him at first, slipping out of rooms when he entered, refusing to meet his gaze. She still carried the sting of his public accusations. But the hospital was a small world, and fate, or perhaps the fragile child, kept dragging them together. One morning, Emma walked into the nursery to find Alexander already there, standing stiffly by the incubator. His large hands rested on the glass, his expression unreadable. You shouldn't be here, she said quietly, though her voice lacked its usual fire. I know, he admitted. His tone surprised her, softer, almost human. But he calms when I'm near. You've noticed it too. Emma hesitated, then stepped closer. The baby stirred, his tiny hand pressing weakly against the incubator wall. Alexander's finger followed the movement, and the infant's touch met his through the glass. Something flickered across his face, something Emma never thought she'd see in the ruthless judge. Tenderness. He doesn't have anyone, she whispered. Alexander's jaw tightened. Neither did I. Not really. The confession hung in the sterile air. Emma turned to study him, caught off guard by the vulnerability in his eyes. For the first time, she saw not the feared judge, but the lonely man behind the title. Over the next days, the bond deepened. Alexander asked questions, not about legal files or conspiracies, but about the baby. About his health, his feeding, the way he cried at night. Emma answered, still cautious, but she couldn't deny what she saw. The way Alexander lingered at the crib, the way he bent down when the infant whimpered, the way his hardened features softened when the child's hand curled around his finger. One night, as rain lashed against the hospital windows, Emma found Alexander seated in a chair beside the nursery. The baby slept soundly in his arms, tiny head resting against the powerful man's chest. Her breath caught. They let you hold him? Alexander looked up, his voice low. He wouldn't sleep until I did. The image burned into her memory, the feared judge cradling a helpless child, looking more like a father than a tyrant. Emma stepped closer, her defenses cracking. You know, for someone who claims not to care, you're doing a terrible job convincing me. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. Maybe I'm tired of convincing myself. Silence lingered between them, but it wasn't hostile anymore. It was heavy with something else, something fragile, uncertain, but undeniably real. For Emma it was terrifying. She had built walls of her own, forged from loss and hardship. And yet, here was a man she should despise, slowly dismantling them with every unexpected act of kindness. For Alexander, it was unsettling. Power had been his armor, control his lifeline. But in the presence of a baby and a woman who refused to fear him, he felt stripped bare. Human. That night, as Emma left the ward, she glanced back. Alexander was still there, the baby safe in his arms, his gaze softened by something she couldn't quite name. And in that fleeting moment, she wondered if fate had brought him not just to the hospital, but into her life. The storm finally broke the next morning, leaving the city washed clean under pale sunlight. But inside St. Mary's Hospital, another storm was ending, one that had changed the lives of 3 people forever. Alexander Grant stood in the administrator's office, flanked by his lawyers and reporters. Cameras clicked, pens scribbled, every eye fixed on him. For once, the man known as the ruthless judge did not wear the mask of ice. He cleared his throat, his voice firm but carrying an unfamiliar warmth. The truth has come to light. A malicious attempt was made to use my name, to tarnish my reputation. But let me be clear, this child is not a burden to me. He is not a scandal. He is innocent and he deserves more than silence and shame. He deserves protection. And he will have it. Murmurs rippled through the room. Reporters exchanged startled looks. The judge, who never bent, who never admitted weakness, was claiming a child not his own. Emma stood at the back of the room, clutching a clipboard, her heart thundering. She had doubted him, hated him, defended herself against him. But now, watching him stand tall, not as a judge but as a man, she felt something shift inside her. After the conference, Alexander found her in the quiet corridor outside the nursery. He looked tired, older somehow, but there was a new fire in his eyes. "I told them the truth," he said simply. "But I also told them this child is mine to protect. Whether by blood or by choice, he deserves a father." Emma's lips parted, her throat tight. "And what about me? The woman you accused, humiliated, dragged into this mess." His gaze softened. "I was wrong. About you. About everything." He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "I can't undo the harm I caused, but I can ask for forgiveness. Not as a judge. As a man who doesn't want to face tomorrow without you in his corner." Her eyes brimmed, torn between anger and something deeper. "Forgiveness isn't given that easily." "I know," he admitted. His hand brushed against the crib's railing, where the baby stirred in sleep. "But I'll earn it. For you. For him." For a long moment, Emma said nothing. Then she looked at the child, his tiny chest rising and falling peacefully, and something inside her cracked open. She had fought too long, carried too much alone. Maybe it was time to let someone else carry part of it. She nodded faintly. One step at a time. Relief washed across his face like dawn breaking. He didn't smile, not fully, but the hardness in his features eased. That evening, the three of them sat together in the nursery. Emma cradled the baby, humming softly, while Alexander sat beside her, watching with quiet reverence. For once, there were no verdicts, no accusations, no walls between them. Only the fragile, impossible bond that fate had written out of a mistake. Emma glanced at him, her lips curving in a whisper. "He may not share your blood, but he already knows your heart." Alexander looked down at the infant, then at Emma. And in that moment he understood. Power had built his world, but it was love, unexpected, undeserved, unstoppable, that would save it. The baby stirred, tiny hand reaching toward them. Alexander covered it gently with his own, and Emma's hand followed. 3 lives bound not by law but by destiny. And for the first time in years, Alexander Grant smiled. One wrong text, one unexpected bond, one new beginning. Would you trust destiny if it came knocking? Subscribe and stay with us for more powerful stories.